2. When the ship came to a stop with a blast from its whistle, a barge pulled out from the shore and was rowed over to us. There. Boatman was stark naked except for a red loincloth. What a barbaric place. Of course, he probably couldn't stand wearing a kimono in that searing heat. The sun beat down so fiercely that the water shone with a nasty glint to it. Just looking at it was enough to make your eyes swim. I asked the purser if this was where I was supposed to get off, and he said it was. From the look of it, the place was a fishing town about the size of the neighborhood of Mori in Tokyo. Who the hell did they think they were sending me to a place like this? How was I supposed to stand it? Well, there was nothing I could do about it now. I jumped down onto the barge ahead of everybody else, and 5 or 6 people got on after me. They loaded a couple of big boxes on too and then Redloin rowed us in to the shore. When we landed, I was again the first one to jump off. Right away I grabbed a runny-nosed kid who was standing there and asked him where the middle school was, but he just gawked at me and said I dunno. The dim-witted hick. Their whole town wasn't any bigger than a cat's forehead, so how could you not know where the middle school was? Just then a man in a strange-looking kimono with tight sleeves walked up and said come with me, and when I followed along he led me to an inn called Minato YA or something like that. A bunch of nasty-looking maids all joined voices to greet me, which just made me want to have nothing to do with the place. I stopped in the entryway and asked them where the middle school was. When they told me that it was a couple of miles away by train, I was even more determined not to stay here. I snatched my 2 valises from the guy in the tight-sleeved kimono and started walking. The people in the inn gave me a strange look. I found the train station soon enough and bought myself a ticket. When I got on the train, it looked as dinky as a matchbox. It had hardly started to get rolling when it was already time to get off. The whole ride couldn't have taken more than 5 minutes. No wonder the ticket was so cheap, I thought. Only 3 sen. I got into a rickshaw and set off for the middle school. But when I got there, classes were already over for the day and there was no one around. The custodian explained that the teacher on night duty had just gone out on an errand. For somebody who was supposed to be on night duty, he seemed to have a pretty casual attitude. I thought about paying a call on the principal, but by this point I was already feeling so worn out that I just got back in the rickshaw and told the driver to take me to an inn. He dashed me off to a place called Yamashiro Way, the same name as the pawnbroker's shop that Kantare's family ran, which was kind of funny. For some reason the maid showed me to a dark room beneath the stairway. It was so hot I couldn't stand it. When I told her I didn't want this room, she replied that unfortunately all the others were occupied, and walked away, leaving my valises just where she had dropped them. There was nothing I could do about it, so I went in and sat there sweating. Eventually they told me that the bath was ready, so I headed for the bathroom and plunged right in, but came out just as quickly. On my way back, I took a look around and noticed that there were actually plenty of nice, cool-looking rooms open. It was outrageous. What a pack of liars. By and by, a maid came around with my dinner tray. The room was as hot as ever, but the food was a lot better than what they gave me in my old boarding house. As she was serving the meal, the maid asked me where I was from, and I told her. Tokyo must be a very nice place, she said. It sure is, I said. After I finished and the maid went back to the kitchen with my tray, I could hear some people laughing out loud. Since there was nothing worth staying up for in a place like this, I went right to bed, but it wasn't that easy to fall asleep. The heat wasn't the only problem, it was noisy, too. The racket was 5 times worse than it had been at the boarding house. When I finally drifted off, I had a dream about Kyo. She was wolfing down some of those Ekigo sweets, bamboo leaf wrappers, and all. I told her that bamboo leaves are poisonous and she shouldn't be eating them, but she said no, this kind is good for you, and went on devouring them. Dumbfounded, I started roaring with laughter. At this point I woke up. A maid was opening the shutters. The sky was just as wonderfully clear as it had been the day before. I had been told that when you take a trip, you're supposed to tip. If you don't, people won't treat you the way you deserve. They must have stuck me in this dark little room because I didn't hand out any tips. My shabby-looking outfit, canvas valises, and imitation satin umbrella couldn't have helped either. As if this bunch of hicks had the right to look down their noses at anybody. Well, I'd show them, let them have a tip that would be sure to give them a nice big shock. No matter how unimpressive I might have looked to them, I had 30 yen left in my pocket from my savings when I set out from Tokyo, and after paying for the train and boat fare and the rest of my travel expenses I still had 14 left. And now I'd have my salary coming in, so even if I let Them have all 14, it wouldn't be a problem. Country people are cheapskates, eh? 5 yen tip would surely be enough to make their eyes pop. Just wait till you get a. Look at this, I thought, as I coolly went off to wash my face, and then went back to my room and waited. The same girl from last night brought in my breakfast. As she served it, she kept breaking into an obnoxious smirk. Outrageous. What did she think she was gawking at? Some kind of stage show? Even a face like mine was a lot more impressive sight than hers was, that much was for sure. I had been intending to wait until after she was through serving to hand over my tip, but I was feeling so angry I just took out a 5 yen bill right then and there and told her to take it to the office. She gave me a strange look. After I finished breakfast, I set out for the school right away. My shoes had been left unshined. I had a pretty clear idea of how to get to the school since I had gone there in the rickshaw the day before. Just a couple of turns and I was right at the gate. The pathway from the gate to the school entrance was paved with slabs of granite, and the noise the rickshaw made as it rattled over them had been hard to take. As I was walking along, I had seen lots of students in their heavy black uniforms. Now they were all streaming through this gate. Some of them were taller than I was, and they looked stronger, too. When it hit me that I was supposed to be teaching kids like them, it made me feel kind of uneasy. I presented my name card and was ushered into the principal's office. The principal had a thin mustache, a dark complexion, and big eyes that made him look like a badger. His manner was horribly stuffy. He urged me to do my best and then solemnly handed me a certificate of appointment with a huge seal stamped on it. Later, when I was on the boat on my way back to Tokyo, I took the certificate, crumpled it up, and pitched it into the sea. Next, he told me that he was going to present me to the rest of the teaching staff, and that I should display my certificate personally to each of them. What a lot of bother. It would have been less trouble just to hang it up in the faculty room for a couple of days. The entire faculty wouldn't be assembling in the staff room until the first period bugle sounded, which wouldn't be for a while yet. The principal pulled out his pocket watch, gave it a glance, and announced that he planned to have a long, leisurely talk with me later on, but to begin with he wanted me to understand the main points in a general way, then launched into a lengthy discourse on the spirit of education. I just stood there more or less taking it in, of course, but as he droned on I began to think that I had let myself in for a lot of trouble by coming here. There was no way I could do what this principal was expecting. Telling a reckless character like me that I was to be a role model for the students, and that I would be required to conduct myself in such a way that I would be looked up to by everyone in the school, and that a true educator is one who not only imparts knowledge but exerts a positive moral influence in his personal life. This was asking for a lot more than he had any reasonable right to expect. Did he really think that anyone of such distinction was going to come all the way out to some country town like this for 40 yen a month? It had always seemed to me that all people are pretty much the same, and if something gets them angry enough, they're bound to get themselves into a fight or two. At this rate, though, I just have to hold my tongue. In fact, I could hardly even go out for a walk. If the assignment was so demanding, they should have explained exactly what was involved before they'd hired me. I don't like lying, so there was no way out of it. I just had to face the fact that I'd come here based on a misapprehension, and make up my mind to give up the job and head for home right away. Now that I'd given the people at the inn that 5 yen bill, all I had left was 9 yen and change, not enough to get me back to Tokyo. What a blunder that tip had been. Even with only 9 yen, though, things would work out one way or another. Even if it wasn't enough to cover my trip home, it was still better than lying. When I informed the principal that I couldn't possibly live up to the expectations he had for me and was therefore returning my certificate of appointment, he blinked those badger eyes of his and gazed into my face for a few moments. Then he laughed and said that what he had been talking about before was simply his ideal, and he was well aware that I wouldn't be able to live up to it, so there was no need for me to worry. Well, if he was so sure of this all along, why did he have to intimidate me with that speech to begin with? By and by the bugle sounded and we could hear a wave of boisterous noise from the classrooms. The principal said that the teachers should all be assembled in the faculty room by now, so I followed behind him and went in. They were all sitting at their desks, which were lined up along the walls of the long, narrow room. As soon as I entered, they all turned to look at me, as if by some prearranged agreement. Did they think I was going to put on some kind of show for them? I went around to each one, presented my certificate for their inspection, and delivered a formal greeting, just as I had been instructed to do. Most of them just rose a little out of their seats and bowed, but some took the ceremony more seriously and actually accepted the certificate when I offered it to them, made a show of reading it over, and solemnly handed it back. It felt as if everybody was just play acting. By the time I got around to the 15th one, the physical education teacher, I was beginning to feel a bit on edge from having delivered the same greeting over and over again. Each of them only had to do this once, but I had to repeat it 15 times. They should have tried giving a little thought to how it felt for the other person. One of the people I greeted as I was making my rounds was the assistant principal, but I didn't catch his name. This Mr. something or other was supposed to be a Bachelor of Arts, a genuine university graduate, which meant that he had to be an important person. He spoke in a gentle voice that had a strangely feminine tone to it. What really surprised me, though, was the flannel shirt he was wearing, despite the heat. No matter how thin the fabric might have been, it must have felt terribly warm. Leave it to a university graduate to go above and beyond the call like that, I guess. What's more, it was a red shirt, much too fancy for the likes of us. Later I found out that this fellow wore a red shirt all year round. This was a strange case. According to him, wearing red was good for your health, so he got these shirts of his made to order. He shouldn't have bothered, after. Or, if wearing red was so good for you, you might as well make your whole outfit red. Then there was the English teacher, named Koga, who had a terribly greenish, sickler-looking complexion. Pasty-faced people usually tend to be on the slim side, but this fellow's face had a puffy look. When I was a kid in grade school, I had a classmate called Tamasan whose old man had the same kind of coloring. He was a farmer. So one day I asked Kyo if that was what happened to you if you became a farmer. She said it wasn't. The problem, she explained, was that he was always eating the pale squashes that grow right at the tip of the vine when the plant is past its prime, and that's how he got so pale and puffer-looking himself. Ever since then, whenever I've seen someone with a pasty, puffy face like that, I figured that they must have gotten that way by eating those squashes. This English teacher must have been eating a load of them, too. Actually, I still don't really understand what makes those squashes pale. When I asked Kyo about it again, she just laughed. I guess she didn't really know either. Next was the other mathematics teacher, whose name was Hotta. He was a rugged-looking fellow with short, bristly hair, and a face that could have belonged to one of the rougher customers among the warrior monks of old. He didn't even bother to glance at the certificates that I was politely holding out to him. Instead he said, "Oh, so you're the new guy, are you? Well, come on over to my place sometime," and gave me a big, hearty laugh. I couldn't see what was so funny. Who did he think would want to hang around with the likes of him if he was going to act so rude? I decided to call him the porcupine, because of the way his hair stood up. The Chinese classics teacher, as you might expect, was a stiff, formal type. Having only arrived yesterday, I fear you must be rather fatigued. And then to commence instruction immediately, most commendable. There was something kind of charming about the way the old fellow rambled on. The art teacher looked like some bit player out of a theatrical company. Sheer silk jacket over his kimono, flicking at the air with his fan. And, "Where, my good man, might you be from? Tokyo? Ah, splendid. Now I won't be so alone. I'm not ashamed to say I'm a Tokyo native myself. If this is what passes for a Tokyo man," I thought to myself, "I would rather have been born someplace else. I could fill you in with the same kinds of details for all the others, but I wouldn't know where to put an end to it, so I'll just stop here." Once the formalities were more or less over, the principal told me that that would do for today, and I should assume my duties in 2 days after having duly consulted with the head mathematics instructor about curricular matters. When I asked who this was, I was informed that it was the porcupine, whom I've already mentioned. Damn it, this is the guy that I'd have to work under. Oh no, I could feel my heart sinking. "Where are you staying?" the porcupine asked. "Yomashiro YA? Alright, I'll stop by soon and we can talk things over." Before I could reply, he grabbed his chalk and strode out the door toward his classroom. Any head instructor who would go to pay a call on his subordinate couldn't have much of a sense of appropriate behavior. Still, I had to admire him for not standing on ceremony. At that point I was going to just go back through the school gate and head right back to my inn, but since there wasn't anything special for me to do when I got there, I decided to take a little stroll around the town instead, with no particular destination in mind. I saw the prefectural government building. It was an old one, left over from another era. I also saw the local army barracks. They weren't as impressive as the Azabu barracks back in Tokyo. I took a look at the main street. It was only about half as broad as the one in Kagurazaka, And the buildings were a lot less impressive, too. This was supposed to have been a pretty big castle town in the old days, but you really couldn't expect much from such a place. As I walked along feeling sorry for all the locals who were so proud to be residents of a castle town, I suddenly found myself back in front of Yomashiro-wae. The town wasn't as big as it might have seemed. I had probably already seen just about everything there was to see. I went inside, ready for lunch. As soon as she saw me in the entryway, the lady who ran the establishment jumped up from the front counter where she'd been sitting and welcomed me back with a bow so low that her head touched the floor. As I took my shoes off and stepped into the lobby, a maid appeared and took me up to the second floor where, she said, a good room was now available. Not only was it on the second floor, it was a 15-mat room, 15 feet by 18, on the front side of the building, with an imposing alcove. Never in my life had I been in such a fancy room before. Thinking that there was no telling when I might have another chance to stay in another one like it, I immediately took off my suit, changed into a thin robe, and lay down right in the middle of the room with my arms and legs stretched out as wide as they would go. It felt wonderful. After lunch I wrote a letter to Kyo. I'm not much good at putting phrases together and I can't remember how to write a lot of the words, so I hate writing letters. It's not like there had ever been anybody that I had to write to, either, but I knew that Kyo must be worrying about me. I wouldn't want her to think that I had drowned in a shipwreck or anything, so I gave it everything I had and wrote her a good long one. This is what it said. I got here yesterday. It's a nothing place. I'm staying in a 15-mat room. I gave them a 5 yen tip and the lady who runs the place bowed down so low she scraped her forehead on the floor. Last night I couldn't get to sleep. I dreamed that you were eating those sweets, bamboo leaf wrappers and all. I'll be back next summer. Today I went to school, and I gave all the teachers nicknames. The principal is the badger. The assistant principal is red shirt. The English teacher is the pale squash. The other math teacher is the porcupine, and the art teacher is the hanger-on. I'll write you more about it later. Goodbye. I was feeling nice and relaxed after I finished my letter, so I stretched out on the floor in the middle of the room again and drifted off to sleep. This time I slept really soundly, no dreams at all. I only woke up when I heard somebody bellowing, "Is this the room?" and saw the porcupine walk in. Before I was even completely awake, he was already getting the proceedings underway. Sorry about this morning. Now, your classes are at. First I was so stunned I could hardly follow what he was saying, but as I listened I realized that the classes he was assigning me didn't sound particularly difficult. So I just went along with it. If that was all there was to it, he could have asked me to start writing the next day, never mind the day after. Once that was settled he announced, as if he had the whole thing worked out already, that I obviously couldn't be planning on staying at this in very long, and that he knew a good place to stay where they wouldn't rent a room to just anybody, but if he put in a good word for me they'd be sure to take me in, so I should get ready to move right away. It would be a good idea to have a look at the place today and get going as soon as possible, he added, so that I could get moved in the next day before my teaching duties began. It was true that I couldn't hope to stay on in this fancy room indefinitely. It might cost more than my whole salary for all I knew. It was too bad that I'd have to leave so soon after laying out that 5 yen tip. But since I was going to leave eventually anyhow, it made sense to leave right away and get settled into a new place, so I asked the porcupine to make the arrangements. He told me that I should go along with him and have a look, so I did. It was a very quiet place, on the side of a hill at the edge of town. The owner was an antique dealer who went by the name of Ikujin. His wife looked to be a couple of years older than he was. When I was in middle school I had learned the word witch in English class, and this lady looked just like one. Even if she was a witch, of course, it wasn't me that she was married to, so I didn't mind. We settled it that I would move in the next day. On the way back to the inn the porcupine treated me to a dish of shaved ice. When I'd first met him at school I'd thought he was awfully rude and arrogant, but now that I saw him doing these things for me, he didn't seem so bad. After all, I guess it was just that he was impulsive, plus he had a temper, the same as me. Later I heard that he was the most popular teacher with the students.